Well, hello and good evening, everybody. I see a lot of friendly faces there in the chat box. Really excited to be here tonight. I haven't been this excited for a guest in a long time. I see Rolf in the chat there, and I think that was the last time I was this excited. And I think Rolf was our last visitor anyway. Jerry, good evening to you, and Jennifer there. Jennifer, I think you're going to love tonight. Andrea here is hiked with family, and Jennifer is taking off on a full through hike with her 4-year-old son. Going to take about 2 months to do so. And so that's pretty exciting. Very excited to hear how that goes. We've got snow in Colorado. It is crazy. We've got a couple of little housekeeping things to talk about first, and then we're going to dive right into this. First things first, I want to bring up here, see if we can share this with everybody. I want to point out here, if you know my favorite hiker on the planet, Details, she is doing a live Q&A giveaway tomorrow to celebrate 1,000 subscribers. One day we woke up and she was at 1,000 subscribers, and the next thing you know, she's almost at 1,200 already. She's absolutely crushing it. So show up tomorrow night. It's at 7 o'clock Central Time. She'll be giving away a number of really great prizes, including some Girl Plus Dog Adventures merch and a Nemo Dagger bike pack. You'll have to correct me, Details, in the chat, but that is a really incredible tent. And so well worth taking out on some of those adventures, and I think everybody should check that out. We're going to make another announcement about that in a little bit. I think it's going to be a lot of fun. I can't wait for that one. We see Whitney there in the chat. Whitney, tonight is your night. This is another great one with another hiking mom. Whitney is CT mom over there saying woot woot to us. Excited to see everybody tonight. So let's start talking about this book for just a moment. I want to share with you how I spent the last week. I was picking up and working my way through this one. This is Uphill Both Ways, Hiking Toward Happiness on the Colorado Trail. This one is, it's from Bison Books, and it's the University of Nebraska Press, also apparently an affiliate kind of publisher. I want to tell you a lot about this one, but I want to give first a quick welcome to our guest here. This is Andrea Lani. Andrea Lani. I whiffed it. I was trying so hard and I totally whiffed it. This is Andrea Lani. Welcome. How are you tonight?
I'm doing great.
Great
to be here.
Well, thank you. I'm really excited to be here. I want to give a sort of a quick rundown. This is sort of a humble brag, but it's important background information here. So for those people who have been following the channel for a while, you'll know that I spend my days as a college professor. So I'm a college professor, and I did my PhD in American Studies. And when you do that, you have to choose sort of focus areas. And one of my focus areas was travel writing. So I spent a full year of my life reading travel writing and travel literature. And this one here is genuinely one of the finest pieces of writing I've read in a long time. It's honest, it's raw, it's got quite a bit of really captures, in my opinion, captures the highs and lows of hiking the Colorado Trail, which is a really important part of considering the trail, because what we're going to talk about tonight are all of those times whenever you're hiking the trail and you spend months and months planning, and then lo and behold, you're going to hit some lows, you're going to hit some highs. The highs are going to be really high, the lows can be really low. And how do you kind of keep yourself in the game there? So a couple of other pieces of important background information here. Andrea, I'm going to get it right. I promise. I'm not going to keep stuttering over it.
Okay.
Andrea is a 2-time Colorado Trail completer. The first time made her way in 1996, all the way down there past Mullis Pass, and then was snowed out, sort of frustratingly so. So you and I have a little bit of overlap there, that in 2020, I made it to Silverton, and lightning storms bumped me off trail where I didn't have time to be sure I could get to Durango in time to finish. So I made it 411 miles in, and then had to call it a day on it. And then also last year, finally sort of wrapped it up, but it was one of those it was a tough one, right? And you have that great quote in the book about any trip worth doing is worth doing twice, and is done twice, right? Something, I'm sort of butchering the quote there. So let's start first with this I want you to share with the group here that this was sort of an important life decision for you, because this was the product of years and years of sort of frustration professionally, and some personal frustrations, and sort of spending a little bit of time kind of thinking on what you want your life to look like, and living away from your sort of rootedness there in Colorado, all the way across the states in Maine, an otherwise beautiful state, but also if it's not home, right, there's that sort of sense of longing. So tell us a little bit about that sort of germ that led you to think, you know what, this is something I want to do with my three sons, my partner. This is important to me enough that I'm ready to quit my job over it?
That's a good sort of setup for the craziness that went into deciding to do this trail. So my husband, who was then a very pretty new long distance boyfriend, and I hiked this in 1996, shortly after we graduated college. He's from Maine. I'm from the Denver area. And I went to Maine for college at College of the Atlantic in Bar Harbor, which was supposed to be a grand adventure, and it was. And then this was the next grand adventure, and we hiked the trail. And we spent a few years moving back and forth between Maine and Colorado, and ultimately sort of ended up in Maine for various, mostly economic reasons. And it's very expensive to live in Denver. It even was in the 90s. We had 3 kids. We built a house. I worked as in the environmental field for a state agency, and then it was fine for a long time. It was a good environment to raise kids in, but over time, the work became pretty terrible due to political reasons, and parenting became really frustrating because kids, as any parents in the audience know, that at a certain age, kids all parenting is mostly just like trying to make them do things they don't want to do, when they're probably between the age of like 6 and college. And I was just tired of living in Maine. It was winter in Maine, which is a very dispiriting time of year. So I was in a bad place, and I was finishing up graduate school in a creative writing program, and I wasn't getting any traction getting my short stories published. So I was just frustrated and had a little mini life crisis meltdown. And so I just looked back and I was like, when's the last time I actually made a decision and followed through on it, rather than just doing whatever, just following the path of least resistance, or, doing what was expected of me or what my husband wanted to do. And it turned out, at that point it was probably 2014. So 18 years earlier, having hiked the Colorado Trail felt like this touchstone moment in my life where I went out and did something that was something I wanted to do, something very challenging and something life affirming and life changing. So I said, let's go back and do that again in 2 years, when it'll be the 20-year anniversary. And also that would make a very cool book. And it took a lot of persuasion on my part to convince my husband that this was a good idea. And that set the stage for the conflict in the book.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's the background of how we ended up back there 20 years after the fact. So we had, at that point, our kids were 15. The oldest one was 15, and the other 2, who were twins, were 11.
Right. And they were overall, I mean, I was pretty surprised by how resilient they seemed to be throughout the course of the hike. There were a couple of times when Emmett was really good at not complaining and sort of pretty steady and even keel. So whenever he sort of had his moment with the water pouch, there was that was pretty telling, right? But I was struck by how everybody sort of ebbed and flowed. But also, I think a good question, one of the reasons that we sort of, when we started considering sort of what this conversation would look like, I think I asked a little bit about sort of group dynamics and how to navigate those. And for anybody who's ever hiked with anybody, you'll know that this is a common tension, but sort of the tension was largely centered on your husband partner who wanted to move on and do bigger miles most days, and your desire to stop and sort of smell the roses, not in any sort of pejorative sense, but really kind of soak in and enjoy, the understanding that this is a once in a lifetime kind of thing, and your boys are growing and you're not really sure what's coming next. So sort of this, in some respects, this tension between not wanting to finish and then not knowing what's next, right? Mm-hmm. And so my question to you is when you're thinking about navigating this, is there anything you would do differently? Is there anything that you would recommend to somebody? One of the sort of as a sort of a disclosure, I guess, I don't know what the word is. The day that I knew that I was that Patty and I decided that we were going to get married was in segment 2 of the Collegiate West, and it's actually in a segment that they moved it off of Texas Creek there, so it's no longer there. But we had this sort of nightmare stay, and it was 20 miles. We were racing up to Cottonwood Pass to get to a shuttle, and I remember this sort of this steadiness to her, and this sort of, and it was a very different experience for us, right? We were very different hikers, and we still are very different hikers, but there was a sort of understanding that that there wasn't tension. Do you know what I mean? That it was a little different than your experience. But so I guess part of my question is for people who are thinking of going out, in some respects, a big hike like this could either really affirm or could also create some real sense of division. So, what would you recommend to people who are planning or considering something like this in the future? What kind of moves would you do differently, and what would you have done the same?
That's a really good question. I think the first time Curry, my husband's Curry, like the spice, and I hiked the trail together. I think we were, even though we still had very different hiking styles, like he's just very strong and fast and has a lot of endurance, and I am slow, and I'm like, oh, look at the flower, oh, a bird, I just not very focused on not very destination oriented. But I think even though we had that difficulty on our first hike, we also were sharing in a lot of working together. Like the amount of work of camp building was a lot greater then, because we were using a Katadyn water filter and a Whisper Light stove. So everything, and we had a tent with 8 million poles. So we had to work really, we had to work together to do things. And I think that kind of built a lot of camaraderie. And it was just the two of us. We had all that time together. There were almost no people on the trail. It was just us. Back then, we rarely saw other humans. So we came off the trail, and we ended up getting married and finishing that last segment that we'd been snowed out of on our honeymoon. And this time we had the difference in our hiking styles, and also, like I admit that I basically coerced him to go onto the trail. Like it was kind of an ultimatum, like we either hike this trail or I lose my mind. So I would recommend, first, don't go on a hike with anyone you have to coerce to go on it with you. They're not going to be all in. And he was into the hike, and he was really enjoying it, and he was making YouTube videos, and I was taking care of the kids and trying to enjoy it and be mindful for writing a book. And we just weren't having those moments of connection. And like trail work was so much easier because we had this single pole tent, and we had in ultraviolet water treatment, and all these things that make trail life so much easier. But it just limited the opportunities for us to have to like talk to each other and figure out how to get things done together, which is kind of a paradox when you think about it that way. So I think we should have communicated a lot more in advance. We should have been on the same page to begin with, and talked about how we would resolve our issues as we went forward. But and if you can do that in your marriage, I would like some lessons. Because it's not easy. You develop patterns and get into ruts, and in civilization it's easier to ignore those things.
Yeah, I mean, I think that makes a lot of sense. I think it's also, so one of the things that we talked about before we started was this sort of the dynamic that was established in part by this being your idea, right? So in the book you talk a lot about how this is your idea, and that kind of puts a lot of pressure on you to make sure everybody else is having a good time.
Right.
And then there's also the sort of subtext, or sometimes it's not subtext, it's just straight text, right? Where there are reflections on the way that sort of gender dynamics play out on trail. And you made a couple of points about how that Curry would handle setting up the camp and building the space and protecting everybody, but then also a lot of the food making and sort of prep, and also part of it, and it's hard to tell really, but you get a good sense for a lot of the emotional labor is being done on the back end of the hiking group, that when people are feeling low, they fall back and they're hiking with you. So, you have a number of those moments where any of the three boys kind of fall back. And then you have these sort of what I would consider some of the more important moments on trail, right? And so when you're thinking about this, what would you say to somebody? It can be, you can take this question any direction you want. So think about it in terms of either maybe moms on the trail, or sort of just women in general on the trail feeling that burden, or just people who are very excited about something and want to share it with others, but maybe they're not as excited. And so you have to really sort of balance your enthusiasm for it with the fact that your enthusiasm also requires them to hike 500 miles to take part in this. So you can sort of address that from any or all of those angles. But I'm curious about how you would sort of balance that pressure that you're feeling, because so much of the hike is mental, and that's really like a lot of the burden that is discussed in this. That uphill battle referenced in the title seems to be quite a bit about that sort of mental strain that you feel, or the pressure.
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, the gender dynamics were, I mean, not unexpected, I guess, but it pretty stark, and it sort of reflects kind of like my husband built a house that we moved into, and I worked part-time, so I spent more time with the kids over the years, and you know, at different times that felt more or less burdensome, you know, because I also wanted to spend the time with the kids and work less. But when it came out to the trail onto the trail, it kind of, it felt very stark. And the fact that he's the strong, fast hiker just sort of established him as a leader, which also was the case the first time we hiked, but I think by the time I was in my 40s, I found that less, you know, I was less willing to just be like, okay, I'll follow you.
Well, there's that I don't mean to interrupt here, but there
Go
is
ahead.
that element to the hiking experience where the leader, there's this sort of division in a sense between the person who leads the group or is in the front of the group, and the sort of the leader of the group. And so there were some really interesting parts where you sort of asserted your voice and you said, no, this is, I get what you've got in mind, but this is why it doesn't work for the group or doesn't work for me. And so it is an interesting one to kind of consider. I mean, just as a sort of thought exercise in some respects, that the leader is not always the person in front on trail. And my brother did a degree in outdoor leadership, and he said that actually the sort of the leader of his groups, when he was taught sort of formally how to lead groups, would always be the person at the back, right, that's bringing up the group. But it kind of speaks to that sense, and a lot of those frustrations that the slower hikers like you or me feel, where you finally get somewhere and everybody's ready to go, or you get somewhere and decisions have been made without you, or you get somewhere and decisions have been made without you, which is now resulting in the people who are going to meet you there are already gone, right? So you find out the decision's been made based on the absence of people to make the decision with, right? I do want to point out, just as a note here, and then I'm going to go back. I want to hear more of your thoughts there. But Rose here shares this idea that you know, making sure your hiking partner is having a good time led her to start hiking solo, and details Girl Plus Dog Adventures, who through hike solo last year. Certainly, I think she was more hiking to stay away from me, but I think that, but I think that it is that pressure that when you hike with anyone, especially somebody whose idea it's not, and then you kind of steer them toward it, then there is that added burden that happens there.
Yeah, definitely. I think I felt that more strongly making sure my kids were having a good time, like both because that's sort of what I've been doing since they were born. You know, I mean, not necessarily like they have to have a good time 24 hours a day, but making sure they were, you know, happy and healthy and not, you know, not going to revolt at any time. And I
There were a
think
couple
maybe
of close moments, right?
there were a couple where, you know, one or the other of them was a little bit like, can we be done with this? But I mean, other than those moments, they were incredible, amazing hikers. Like, you know, I expected them to be really good hikers, and they exceeded my expectations. And I think that's, for anyone thinking about hiking with their kids, like, don't underestimate them. I mean, don't push them to a dangerous limit, but you know, kids can rise up to occasions that I think our society doesn't demand of them or expect of them. So kids are pretty awesome, but they also need to like just chill out and have a, you know, goof around and
Right.
you know, play in the stream or play Harry Potter trivia or whatever. But I think I could have put more effort into trying to make sure my husband was having fun. I don't know what I could have done differently.
Well, I
I
mean,
can't I can't imagine, like, I wouldn't have gone on this hike if I couldn't bring my kids with me, because I wouldn't have wanted to be apart from them that long, and it was important to my narrative, and I don't think they would have gone if my husband hadn't gone also, and I don't think I could have handled the carrying everything for everybody. I mean, not that they were carrying their own sleeping bags and personal items, and eventually they carried more and more of the food, but we still had the tent and, like a lot of group gear that my husband and I carried. So it couldn't have happened if all 5 of us hadn't gone, like, it wouldn't have happened at all. But I just wish, I don't know, I just wish I was a better communicator.
Well, it's sort of a classic case of a classic case of developing those lines of communication, because it doesn't sound like things are dysfunctional, right? In the book, that's one of the things that sort of the I don't know if frustration is the right word, but it's one of the things that makes it so relatable, is that it's throughout the book. I mean, things never really come to a head, and that it's more like there are these little frustrations that sort of carry forward, and that, when you look at it, it's easy for an outsider to say, like, just say something, right? But then the reality is that if you haven't sort of opened those channels of communication, it's not that easy. It's not that simple to do so. And so in some respects, kind of kind of a takeaway would be really talking early about how you're going to communicate those things, and anticipating them, because so many of the times when we talk about those hikes, right, we talk about the best parts of it. And I always like to kind of close my eyes, and I'm no expert at this, by the way, mind you, right? But I always like to think, like, what's it actually going to be like? And I try to imagine the sore feet and the dust in my shoes and the stinky clothes and the heat on my shoulders and the dehydration. And then that helps me kind of start thinking through some of those things that are, to borrow a phrase, right, the sucky things that are awesome sometimes, right? And so it's kind of dealing with that is, it's important, right? But it's not easy, and it's not something that all of us are good at. And anyway, so kind of thinking through that, it's also interesting in that case that part of it is, you have he's got his own thing going on, right? That he's got his own way of engaging, but doesn't always, at least according, and we're only getting your side, by the way. So just as a note here, but at the same time, it doesn't necessarily seem like there's a solid understanding at all times, especially on the through hike, the amount of effort you're putting in. Or I was telling details earlier tonight about how it was interesting that there was this frustration that you're staying around, and because of the way the work was divided, you're closing up camp. And just by the very nature of the division of labor, you're the last person to finish up because you have the last thing to do. But then the perception is that you're holding everybody up, right? And so that's got to be the most frustrating kind of, like, there's got to be a skit in there, like an SNL skit happening there. Tell
I
us a little bit of, oh, go ahead.
I think every mom would get that. Like, it doesn't matter if you're hiking or you're just going to, like, daycare, or the mom is the last one in the car because you have to, like, feed the kids and make sure they're changed and dry and dressed and in the car seat and the diaper bag's packed. And then, I remember my dad doing this, my husband doing this, like, just sitting there waiting, like, come on, what's the holdup? But you have like 8,000 logistical things to take care of, and then
Right.
finally everybody gets in the car, and then you stagger out with your 1 or 2 personal items that you finally remembered. And so I
Yeah.
think that's not unique to the trail. It's a very
Yeah.
mom place to be. But
Do
I
you
think
think it'd be do you think it'd be easier to be on time if you just tried harder, though? I'm just
yeah,
teasing. I'm just teasing.
I'm
Yeah.
guessing younger couples, I'm really putting a lot of faith that younger couples are better at handling this. Like, there's been more, like, growth in gender balance since my husband and I had kids starting 20 years ago. So
Yeah, it'd be an
young people,
interesting
prove me wrong.
well, it'd be an interesting thing to think about, and specifically that idea that this is one of the nice things about the trail, is that it's this opportunity to kind of break free of it, but it often does recreate these sort of gender norms. And but I'd be interested to hear studies in the future done on how these sort of dynamics can be reworked, right? That it can be this space where couples can rethink that division of labor. And it's something that certainly I've heard my mom talk about in the past, and she got a career later in life, and sort of talked a lot about that division of labor, and how she had to start communicating with my dad that it's your turn to start doing the dishes, that kind of thing. But absolutely really key there. Now, I want to talk a little bit. So I'm still open to talking about these things, but I want to talk a little bit about the structure of the book itself and sort of the type of book that it is, because I think that's one of the most exciting parts of the writing here. That it is a book about your hike, but just as a pitch for everybody there who is listening here, it's not just a hiking book, right? That there are these forays where you go into long stretches and sort of I would point people specifically to that Leadville area, the area you're most familiar with, and studying the way that the geology of the area came about, and then the laws that impacted the shaping of the area and the sort of interplay between culture. Like, I mean, you go back to the 1860s in relationship with DC in Leadville, and was it Tabor, and sort of this interplay back and forth between the sort of skepticism that we see, this anti-federal government regulation skepticism we see in Leadville, and sort of replayed out very much. And you kind of feel it when you're in Silverton for sure, especially pandemic. If you into Silverton in the pandemic, get ready. But all that being said, so there's that part, and then there's also, you sort of tap into your history or your understanding and knowledge as an environmentalist, and sort of your work there to talk about the different ant plants and animals and how they balance. And I found there to be quite a bit of optimism about some of the sort of the beetle kill. There was a sort of interesting optimism in a weird sense about, like, this is not the end of Colorado, right? It's still going to be fine, sort of, in some way. So I'm curious about how you kind of came upon this decision to write this part travel memoir, part history, part political reflection in the like environmental policy. When I say political, you're talking policy, which does ultimately lean on politics, but when we're talking about the actual policies, that's what I mean by that. How did you come about that as like your model for putting this one together? And what kind of research how did you find the research to go?
Um, so I knew, like, I knew setting out on this hike, I wanted to write a book, and I knew I wanted to, thank you, Jennifer. I wanted to, include both the hikes. And my initial idea was what has changed in Colorado in 20 years and what's changed in myself. That was my sort of nascent idea. But I was also very interested in the land use and environmental sort of on the ground things. That's what I studied in college. It's the area I worked in. I mean, less directly because I was in Maine and doing air quality regulation, but still an environmental policy nerd. And then I also a naturalist, so and I didn't know that much about the natural world when I hiked the first time, and so I was really interested in connecting more with the names of the plants and animals and trees and things like that. So so I knew I wanted to kind of confront these. I knew there would be these visual reminders of environmental damage or change on the ground, like starting with Strontia Springs Dam and Climax Mine in Leadville and some other things along the way. So I knew I wanted to sort of look those in the eye and really try to understand the history behind them and the future and what that meant for the landscape. So I knew I wanted to look at those things when I did the hike. I had planned to research before we started the hike, but I was working full time, raising 3 kids, and planning a long distance hike, so that didn't happen. So basically the writing process was I took notes every night in the tent. I wrote in these like small journals that I had one sent to me in every resupply box. And then when I got back, I typed all that up and changed it from sort of immediate past tense to present tense. And then I put the journals from the first time we hiked kind of in the right geographic spots. And then I just started researching the structure of a hiking book. The structure was laid out for me because I went geographically and chronologically. So that was nice. And then these specific environmental concerns kind of arose from the land as I came upon them, like water reclamation when we came to the dam, and fire ecology and policy when we came to the Buffalo Creek burn. So it was really nice how the trail like set me up for everything. Like the 2 big things that did really get addressed would be like coal mining and fracking, which are 2 big things happening in Colorado. But the trail doesn't come up across any of those, which is kind of a relief because that might have been too much to handle. But I've lost the train of your original. Oh, how did I do the research? So the research was really hard to do because I live in Maine, and I just quit my job, so I didn't really have funds to go to Colorado to, like partake of the University of Colorado library or anything like that. So I ordered books online, like used books. I ordered books through Interlibrary Loan in Maine. There's a college in Maine that has a pretty strong natural resources program. So they had a lot of the books I needed, even though they were Colorado focused. And I could get research articles through the library without having to pay the $30 by, getting 1 or 2 a week. And then some things I couldn't get in Maine, and I'd have my mom check it out from a library and photocopy the chapter and mail it to me. And I thought that maybe I didn't know how to research, like I hadn't been taught how to do research right in college, because I'd read, a book or 2 or 3 and several articles to write a paragraph, but people have since told me that's just how research works. So
Yeah.
it's a little laborious, but it was super interesting. And initially all those sections were much longer than they ended up in the books. Some of my early readers were like, you need to cut these back a lot. But I'm like, but doesn't everybody want to know what happened at that meeting?
Yeah. Well, it was interesting because there was a sort of a compression of the timeline toward the end, where the pace picks up in the book, where you cover, in the first 200 pages, you cover, I don't know, like 350 miles. My math is bad, but basically the last segment there is very fast in the book, and you do get a sense that, there's like 250 pages. You got to get it in under that line, and it's still beautifully written, but it's also it's nice in the sense that it really, again, going back to this idea that it mirrors that experience of the Colorado Trail. Is as much as you're enjoying it, there's still this sort of pace at the end where it's like, all right, let's get to Durango.
Right.
And in that case, it really works nicely. I also want to point out here that there's this sort of through line that's maybe less obvious here. And one of the things that I love about the Colorado Trail is it's one of the few long trails, the only that I know of, that was founded and sort of designed by a woman, right? And there's this sort of an important history of the way that women have helped us in the environment protect some of these spaces. And Hike with Mike points out the urban sprawl. He's a Floridian. He talks about development destroying Florida's wildlands and wetlands specifically. And the Everglades are an interesting park in that it was initially protected by a women's group that sought out and lobbied the U.S. government to protect that space. And it really did save Florida, because if you don't have that sort of the Everglades there, the entire state dries up and dies, right? So, and over in Colorado, you have the same thing happening with the Great Sand Dunes National Park was going to be mined for magnetite. Women's group steps in and saves that one. And then also we have these sort of fingerprints of women that show up. But to your point in the book, we have Emma Burr Mountain, and then the rest of it is sort of, it's devoid of this sort of memory of where women are. I mean, I guess we get the Gayskill Bridge and Judy's Rest and such, but it's an important topic, and doing that research, I think, is important as well. I know that your work didn't necessarily foray into the gendered history of it, but I'm seeing some through lines in terms of the way that research can go. Whitney mentioned that she just ordered a copy. You will not be disappointed there. And actually, Jennifer here picked up a copy, and she was reading it this weekend, getting ready for her hike. And I don't know, Jennifer, you have to share with us if your hike was delayed as a result of the snows recently. I know you were setting out in a couple of weeks or planning to, so really curious about that as well. So I want to talk to you now about the food choices. So food choices were simultaneously, I don't want to give too much away, they were simultaneously fascinating and boring all at once, right? That there was the cold oatmeal, so everything was cold soaked, right? And that's different than your hike in 96. And then so you're cold soaking and oatmeal. And then at dinner there was the couscous, a couple of different varieties of that, and really kind of, it sounded rough, right? And I'm an animal when it comes to eating. I'm not very picky. The other question that I had for you was actually a question of, you were doing the preparation. So at night you were making dinner for everyone, and then you were also making breakfast and prepping it for the morning. What was what was the thought there? Or is that the kind of thing where it's just less trouble to do it yourself than to spend your energies investing in either having Curry help you or having Curry help you get the boys to do it? And so sort of twofold, why that diet? And then also why, how did it end up that you were the one in charge of all of that, given that it seems to me pretty easy to put stuff in a jar with water?
Yeah, good point. I don't know. Um, so the reason we had this don't do what we did with food, but I figured out, when as we were planning this hike, I knew we couldn't. I knew we had to have as light of packs as possible. Um, and so we, because we had very heavy packs, and then like in 1996 were the days where you're like, more pack, like people competed to see whose pack was heavier. And then now it's like you compete to see whose pack is lighter. But I knew that my husband and I would be in charge of carrying all the food mostly, plus, the tent and whatever, but other group gear. So if we added a stove and fuel to that, it would be a lot more weight. Oh, and a cooking pot and, heat proof dishes. That would be a lot of weight. And then the time, it takes 45 minutes to boil water at 10,000 feet. And if you have to have enough water to make 5 people's worth of macaroni and cheese or whatever, it's going to take hours to make dinner. So I decided it was both weight and labor saving.
We need to mail you a jet boil. Let's have a sort of a GoFundMe.
But I mean, you would need like 5 different jet boils to cook food for 5 people, right?
I mean, one you can pass around. You need the pots, right? But that'll be quick.
Yeah.
We'll get them in the mail. We'll just ask Jet Boil, get on it. Get this woman a Jet Boil pot.
And I could have spent more time researching. Like I really literally thought it was like either the Whisper Light or an alcohol stove, which is illegal in Colorado, I think.
It
If
is,
you have
yeah.
if you're in a fire prone zone, and we would need to carry gallons of alcohol to boil enough water. So anyway, that was my thinking, and I figured when I mentioned it to my husband, he'd be like, "No way, we're not doing that." But he was like, "Yeah, okay, let's do that." So I went for like the healthiest kind of food I could find, so that you can get these instant refried beans from Fantastic Foods and brown minute rice and whole grain ramen and all these things. And I tested them at home with tap water, and it pretty much soaked up. And overnight oats was a very trendy thing back in the early 20 teens. So I thought it was all genius, and it was like when it's raining outside and you're eating cold food inside of a tent, and it's just very depressing. And then also I think part of the reason that my husband was so cranky is because he didn't get coffee. I don't drink coffee, so I mean, it probably would have given me some energy if I'd had some caffeine, but he didn't get his coffee, so he was grumpy.
Well, that changes everything. Now you're
Anyway,
the villain in this book
and I was the
completely. If
villain
you
because it was my idea.
Yeah, well, if you're
And
now if you're the one behind the no coffee, right? But much
I mean,
like
there's other
the
ways to get caffeine, right?
right, well, much like the coffee, I mean, the coffee and the sort of his search for underwear, right? Like that's it was an interesting one, just that he didn't have a pair, and then it was still your responsibility. Which I don't mean to give too much feel. I don't want you to go home and be like, this guy's snack box said. But at the same time, I mean, I think the coffee certainly is a game changer, but I do think that it's interesting that it would be, I mean, that it would be such a hard thing for morale if you're used to coffee to go without it. Now, what about, so you did mention the tent, and so 5 people, two, like 3 stinky boys, very averse to washing their socks. 4 stinky boys, right? Who are averse to washing their socks, right? What was the thinking behind one tent for 5 people rather than 2 tents nearby? Was that just a matter of sort of not wanting to carry the 2 tents, or was it something different?
Um, well, I don't know how much thinking actually went into that. I guess when I was first planning this trip, my kids were the younger 2 were 9 and the other one was 13. So they were pretty, like 9-year-olds, it sounds like a big number, but they're pretty little. So and Go Light still existed as a company at that point, and so they had a 5-person tent. And it was a pretty good price, so I ordered it and we took it camping. And it's a genius tent. It's one of those pyramid with a
Yeah, I
hole in
love
the
that
middle,
tent.
and it can withstand a hurricane force wind. It's so easy to set up, and it's a little flimsy. I've had to fix the zippers and put some like nylon tape on some places, but I think I just wanted us all to be together, to be together and also one tent. Even a 6-pound tent weighs less than two 4-pound tents. So I think just the togetherness and the simplicity, and I guess I don't know if one tent really takes up that much less space than two. Like either way, you have to get a pretty big campsite.
Yeah, the campsite choices are all pretty well the same, I would think. I mean, there aren't
Yeah,
many places where you could fit. I mean, the 5-person tent's interesting because it does limit, in my opinion, because you need a pad big enough, and it's a lot easier to
right,
find two smaller pads.
right,
But
right.
all the same, it was an interesting choice, and there is the gear list in the back, by the way. So if anyone is a gearhead, you spelled out every person's everything that they had, and I thought that was pretty helpful for thinking that through. Was there a piece of gear other than the shoes you got in Creed? Was there a piece of gear that your thought is this is the one thing I would never take off into the woods without?
Oh, umbrellas,
Okay.
absolutely. Yeah, yeah. I have a friend going on a section of the Appalachian Trail, and I kept trying to talk her into an umbrella, and she said, "Oh, I won't need it in the southeast." I was like, "What are you kidding? It must rain a ton in Georgia." But it's just it changed. That is a morale booster right there, to have your own little like
Yeah.
microclimate where it's not raining and you don't have the sound of your raincoat hood, and if it's hot, you're not sweating inside a raincoat, getting wet. And
Yeah.
the trekking umbrella is a lifesaver, game changer.
Yeah. A lot of people so Details likes to carry an umbrella as well, specifically for hail. And I've
Yep,
been caught in hail every single time I've been on the Colorado Trail,
yep,
and it's a nice one as well. Jerry here from Tangent Trails, he's out in Texas, and he is famous for his Taco Tuesdays, Wednesdays, Thursdays, and Fridays. But he does enough cooking at home, he says, and he also agrees with you that going stoveless is often a really smart call. And I went stoveless last year, and I went the year I made it to Silverton. I went from Salida on stoveless, and I don't know that I'll go back necessarily, but it is definitely an interesting one. I don't think that I would share a tent with 4 people. I think that would be rough.
I think
That
it's
was cool.
if you've given birth to them, you're used to all kinds of gross things coming out of their
Yeah, yeah.
bodies. So sleeping in the tent is not the worst. And it was fun, like some of our best times were in the tent where, the kids told stories, or, I was reading books to them at night. And um, like, I think the moments we had all together in the tent were really highlights of the trip.
Right, right.
So I don't think I would have it would have been a very different dynamic if we had to decide who goes in which tent. And maybe my husband would have been happier if we'd had our own tent. But
Well, I was thinking it would make a normal, like a sort of natural division, that it would be the 3 boys in one tent and
right.
then mom and dad in the other or something. Um, but I don't. I mean, I don't. I'm not a dad yet, so I don't know. Soon enough,
I didn't.
right?
It was fun. I liked. I would. That's definitely not one I would do differently. The tent,
Yeah.
the food maybe, but I think there's ways you could do cold soaked food to make it more fun and flavorful, and
Yeah.
add more like fat and salt to it. Because when you try to buy like the healthier food, it has less fat and salt.
Right.
Like if you try to avoid other weird additives, you also lose the calories and things you need
Well,
for
it's
hiking.
interesting
So
in the 6 years so when you hiked it in 2016, since then, cold soaking has become so much a thing that the food is terrific. I mean, it really is. There are options you can get, and even if you need a budget option, you can look at their ingredients list and approximate quite a bit. There are individual pouches of olive oil. To your point, fat carries flavor, right? And so what's also interesting about this is both of your trips have been on the front end of two really pivotal moments for sort of through hiking the trail. That you had 96 when you were there. You were right there. I thought that was one of the most fascinating pieces, that you had to skip segment 2 because of the burn zone, right? It was on fire. So right then before that, and that's, I mean, I'll make no bones about it. It's one of my least favorite segments because it's so painful and so brutal and hot. And every time I go through, it's tough. But then you also went back in 2016, and I was just ahead of you that year, actually. So I did from Monarch all the way to Durango in July. And so I might have been a few weeks ahead of you all, but that was also, it was when Gaskill passed away. She was on trail when I started. Actually, I met up with a woman through hiking and finished the trail, and she was a good friend of mine to this day. And she said she passed Gaskill backpacking at, I think, 84, still out on the trail. But it was this point where the trail really kind of started to explode in popularity, and sort of the pandemic's only exacerbated it, and now it's this sort of popular one because it can be done in a month, right? That's rare for a trail. It's the most beautiful long trail in America, in my estimation. So looking ahead, who would you say, would you ever do this hike sort of as a solo hike in the future? Is that something that's not of interest to you? Is it really just the kind of thing where it was like maybe a two off, I guess would be the way to say it?
I don't know. I think enough time has passed that I've forgotten how much my knees and feet hurt that I would consider it. Um, maybe when I'm 62, do it every 20 years, and then again when I'm 82, I'll be like the Granny Gatewood. I definitely think I would like to do more shorter hikes in places, to see different places that are less, like you said, people are going there like crazy, less well known. And I think I would like, the way I would really enjoy backpacking is go hiking into a place and spending a lot of time there and doing, short forays from one place, but really getting to know one specific area better. Like the Holy Cross Wilderness is a place that I've wanted to go back to ever since the first time we hiked through. So, finding someplace more remote, spending more time in a single area, and, you know, digging down and enjoying one thing rather than just hiking day after day after day in one direction. But never say never. I might do it.
Yeah. The through hike it's a distinct way of engaging with the land, right? It's one where, the Colorado Trail is really great for it because the sort of landscapes you move through evolve slowly. Yet you see so much different areas. You've got the deserts on the front end and the canyons, and then you work your way up, and you get the alpine zones that you kind of break through in that Holy Cross Wilderness, and then kind of move your way through the mesas and that sort of the tougher areas. Now, you did the east and the west though in separate years. In 96 you went the east, the traditional route, before the west was a thing. And now the West is very much a thing. And in fact, I sort of would predict that in the future, the West will be the route, given its popularity. Based on your sort of memory of it, if somebody in the crowd were taking off on a through hike this year, would you send them east, or would you say the right thing and send them west?
Oh, was that a leading question?
A little bit, yeah.
If I recall the East correctly, I think there was a lot of road walking, and I don't know if they've amended that in 25 years or not. So that's one reason that I would find that less appealing. But if you want to go soak in hot springs,
Yeah,
you go right by Princeton Hot Springs, so that has appeal.
that's
I think the loop
basically
would
the
be a
only.
really awesome trip, to
Yeah.
just hike the loop, and I would do it counterclockwise, so you don't have to hike up to, right beyond Monarch, wherever that's called,
Yeah,
where the two trails come together. I think that would be, yeah. But the Collegiate West was spectacular, just
yeah,
gorgeous, gorgeous. But if you don't like thunder and lightning or hail, don't go that way. Or
yeah,
plan your trip so we met someone who would camp below a pass so that they'd go over it in the morning and avoid the
yeah.
convective storms, which is super smart. I wish I'd thought of that.
Yeah, they need to
But
check out. There's a great YouTube channel called Outside Comfort Zone, and he has videos that will coach you on stopping at the bottom of
oh,
passes.
oh, you're one of
And
those people.
that's yeah. I mean, it was one of the things I learned on the JMT actually, and it was more a matter of necessity because it just the storms are later in the Sierra, and so we would just have to stop, and it just kind of built in us. We would go as far as we could before we felt unsafe, and then
Yeah.
I do want to point out here. So Rolf here is he's a big supporter of the CT. He does the trail cruise. He did the CT last year, and he is going out to do the loop this year. They do have the east down to just 6 miles of road walking on the east, and it's actually right there by the Mount Princeton Hot Springs. The rest of it has been moved. That's the good news. The bad news is the way they got it off the road was sending it straight up the side of mountains. And so the sort of the myth that I always tell people when we talk about this is that the east is, in my estimation, physically way more demanding because you have three really steep, sort of as steep as Hope Pass, maybe not as long as Hope Pass, but at least as steep back to back to back, right as you leave and get onto the east. So it's just a personal sort of, everybody's got an opinion, and I have a strong one about it. And I've done both of them twice, and so I think that the west is certainly the route that I would go in the future. Now, tell me a little bit here. I want to talk a little bit about the sort of the expectations versus reality. And I want to get your thoughts on this because this is something that I'm certainly guilty of in my own life and planning. And I've gotten better as I get older. But when I plan these hikes, when I started, I had visions of what it would be like. And then things don't line up with what I think it's going to be like, in the past, I would get really frustrated and discouraged. And now I'm much better at sort of, much better is relative, right? I get less frustrated
Yeah.
when my vision of what things should be like don't line up with what they are like. What would you say to somebody who is planning to take off on a big hike like this so that they can be mentally prepared for those certainties that their expectations won't line up with reality?
Um, that's a good question. I definitely like the first time we hiked that, I thought I would be like Julie Andrews, like The Sound of Music, dancing across mountaintops, and everything was, would be pristine and beautiful. And it turned out, like, oh, there are all these highways. You end up camping near planes flying over, dirt bikes going through wilderness areas, like those physical things. And then also like, oh, this is really friggin' hard. Like, my body can't deal with it. And I didn't have any coping mechanisms at all the first time we did the hike. I just suffered. So I think that I think maintaining perspective, like recognizing like this is a super great gift and privilege that you're able to do this. And even though right now it feels like torture and what possessed you to do it, like there's so many elements of it that make that worthwhile, like the scenery and the wildflowers and the interactions you may have with your hiking partners when they're good, or I mean the interactions, not the partners, or people you meet, or like just moments of insight you have while you're out there, or just the peace and quiet of camping on a mountaintop, or like the relief after a thunderstorm passes if you happen to not plan well. Um,
Right.
so I think just recognizing that this is like a rare, wonderful gift that you have been given, and try to enjoy it. But also, like, it's okay to be tired and grouchy and uncomfortable sometimes, because you can't just be like smiley and cheerful all the time, because that's not realistic.
Yeah, yeah, and that speaks to what Rose here says here is that the physical stress on your body is hard mentally, backpacking is challenging, but the overall experience is great. And
That's right.
so that seems to be, I mean, that it's really captured. There was one spot in your book that, it was early where I think it was at the end of segment 2 maybe, and you go to sleep and you're sort of got this moment where you're like, we're gonna make it. It's going to be okay. And then the first thing when you wake up is, we're not going to make it. It's not going to be okay. And I think that that really does kind of capture quite a bit of that sort of the spirit of what the hike can be like, and especially kind of fits with the what I believe to be a sort of pretty normal experience of a through hike, the sort of highs and lows, especially early. And on the
Mhm.
Colorado Trail, I think the front end of it, the first 150 miles are some of the hardest miles of the trail, and I would argue the hardest 150 of the sort of 3 blocks, right? But it really captured that kind of spirit. Now, let me ask you this. So, just a sort of what I call an ESPN question, means there's no right or wrong answer. It's just fun to talk about. What would you say are your favorite, maybe 1 or 2, 3 segments of the trail?
Wow, I don't have the segments memorized by name, by number, but love the Holy Cross Wilderness, like both, although crazy buggy the second time we did it.
Yeah.
But just something so magical and spectacular there. The whole Collegiate West, if there were just a fewer people, is super beautiful. And the Weminuche Wilderness is amazing.
Yeah, absolutely. And then with the people, let's talk about that for a moment or two. And so we've got a couple of folks here. So the Mad Hippies just showed up, and we've got here they were talking a little bit about food, but they're out of Denver, and they did the trail 2 years ago, and then they're heading out. They still have to capture the Collegiate West, so we'll have to push them to do that this year. Hopefully, they have some really great videos that kind of capture it and kind of, one of the things that can be great about their videos is that they really capture that sort of the enjoyment and sort of downtime and quiet and very peaceful. But then also the in terms of the people, what I thought was interesting is the experience. You went in with 4 people, so a group of 5, and it's still there were a couple of moments where you said, we pass people and we never see them again, or they're out of our lives forever. I thought that was a really distinct difference between my experiences solo hiking the trail or hiking it with one person and then making friends, because every time I've set foot on the trail, I've made friends for life, right? That I still keep up with, but it's a very different experience. And so, can you talk a little bit about, I'm curious, the other side. So for me, the advantage is I make these lifelong friends, right? And that's great. I'm a real extrovert. I used to be called King Jared when I was 5. That sort of sums me up. So we're very different people in that regard. But I'm curious about some of the ways that the bonds between, I mean, you talk in the book about it, but I'm hoping you'll share with the audience some of those bonds with your sons Zephyr, Emmett, and Milo. What were some of the ways that you sort of saw those bonds strengthen throughout the course of that time, and what would you say to a mom like Jennifer who's taking off with her 4-year-old about walking? For me, so the last piece here, for me, my worry is that when I have a little one, that I'm going to be so excited and push this on them, something like this, that it's going to end up having the reverse effect, right? That I've got a kid who just goes outside and pours motor oil into rivers because they're so mad at dad for taking them out into the woods. So the two things: one is how did you see those bonds sort of develop and strengthen, and then also what would you recommend to somebody taking their children into the woods to make sure that at the very least they don't sort of sour the next generation on wilderness?
Yeah, that's a real danger. But I'd say the bonds among my children. So my oldest son Milo is 4 years older than his brothers, who are twins, and up until we went on the hike which is they just turned 11. The twins were basically inseparable, and then Milo being 4 years older, like that's a pretty big, like exactly 4 years. Their birthdays are just a few days apart. It's a pretty big age gap, and he's always been like a very mature person, and they're more normal, so it feels like a bigger age gap than it is chronologically. And so they've always gotten along fine, but they never really connected that much, I think. And then being on the trail, Milo was able to just kind of let go of, like he wasn't, hanging out with his high school friends, and he wasn't playing guitar, and he wasn't being cool. Like he was just, like there was no one to talk to except his brothers. And so he didn't have to, perform, like we're always performing wherever we are, but he didn't have to be like the cool big brother with the, high school friends, the guitar. And and plus so he got to be a little more silly and goofy and, like kind of regress a little bit, but in a good way. And then they all had to be more mature because they would, like they had to not get lost thousands of miles of wilderness and help with camp and help, like keep things rolling as they needed to. So it kind of sort of compressed their age difference, I feel like, and they just developed some really cool. They just had some really great experiences together. Like they just all 3 go hiking off down the trail together at after a break or first thing in the morning, and you could just hear them telling stories to each other. Talking about food, obviously, talking about bodily functions was also very entertaining to them all. So it was a really, really nice, like wonderful bonding experience that I think will last them a lifetime, but it also allowed when we got back to, because they were together all the time, the twins, like twins have to individuate like the way that kids have to individuate from their parents. So they individuated pretty hard after we got back, and they're 17 now, and like probably from 13 to 16 they barely spoke to each other, so they're kind of coming back together. But I think the trail allowed them to be able to have the space to become their own people, and that was hard for me to watch as a parent, but I think it was an important part of their development. And that's going way into twin psychology that you didn't ask, but so their relationship to each other was super awesome. And then I got to spend some time with each kid individually, mostly the twins, because they would, if they got tired or just didn't feel like hiking, they'd be in the back with me. And we just got to spend talk, and I kind of witnessed their development in these ways that wouldn't have come. Like Emmett became a trail angel and bought candy in town and gave it to other hikers, and Zephyr saw all the wildlife. Like he'd be like, oh look, a golden eagle, that nobody else had seen before he saw it. And a little much less with Mile, because he was just he just ate up the miles, and he was always like at the front of the pack. But a little bit, I did get to spend a little bit of time. And then in the tent at night, I'd read to them, and like they were obviously way too old to have stories read to them, but they all loved it. Like they try to smash into the same space I was in. So it was just love, like that time we all, like relationships we all built together was really wonderful part of it, especially at the age they're at, because like kids become teenagers, they don't really want to have that much to do with their mom anymore. So it was like a nice kind of last hurrah as like that really close bonding time.
Right.
And I forgot the second half of the question.
Just advice or tips for.
Oh yes, not making your kids. Oh, so they were super positive, and like no one had, like they were very cheerful. Like I'm not cheerful, but like well adjusted the whole entire time we were hiking, and very positive. And then the minute we got home, they're like, that was the worst summer of our lives. But my oldest son, later he was like, I would do that again, but not with you. And he's talked about hiking the Appalachian Trail. He did backpacking for his college outdoor orientation program. He's going to be leading the backpacking outdoor orientation program for his college. So we didn't scare him away. Right. And then we were at a college tour with the twins, and the admissions officer asked them what they'd like to do, and one of them said hiking, and I was like, don't say anything. So I don't think they're scared away forever, but we tried to go on a backpacking trip, a couple, probably 6 weeks after we got back from the Colorado Trail, and everybody was like, no way. So, but last summer, my husband took them all on the 100-mile wilderness, which is cool. The last part of the Appalachian Trail. Yeah. And they had an awesome time. So
did they do the full 100?
They did the full 100 plus Katahdin. Yeah.
Wow. Good for them. That's great. Yeah. Go ahead.
And they knew they could do it, because they'd been hiking when they were 11. So I think it was important, like they developed a lot of self-confidence through this experience that maybe they don't recognize consciously, but that I can see in them.
Yeah, I think that for me is the best part of the sort of personal part of the trail is the sort of problem solving abilities that you get. And you do get a sense, just to kind of make sure that we bring this back, especially to the book, that you get a sense in the book of them growing sort of that mental maturity. And I was struck by one of them had blisters. Was it Milo got blisters toward the end? Yeah. But there wasn't, I was thinking of me at 15 and what blisters would mean, and it would have been disastrous, right? Now I hike through blisters and it's fine. It's not great, but I'm definitely not going to give up a hike because of that. But all the same, you see this sort of growing personal strength in each of them. And also there's a sort of definitely an underlying empathy that they each grow, where there's this balance where at the start of the trail, it's sort of mom and family and everybody's sort of their own unit. But by the end, there's this sort of these subtle moments where they're checking on each other. They're making sure that other people are doing well. Like that moment you mentioned, was it Emmett with the Twix bar? doing trail magic as he goes, and so you start to see them kind of develop this sense of looking at others, and kind of to what the mad hippies say here, that it changes people, the bonds are special. But I do think you get the sense with each of you that it sort of changes you in this way. And I think that that's absolutely the case, that when you start seeing the changes in the boys, it's very different. I also thought, I wanted to ask one other question about the sort of the self presentation in this work. And so I thought that it was interesting to me that you were really, part of the reason I think this book is really honest is that you seem to be very open about the places where you handled things in a way that was necessary, or maybe in a way that was not necessarily shedding the best light, right? That maybe you were grumpy in different places. I mean, you were there were never any major moments where I'm like, this woman's a monster, right? But there were
Thank
certainly
you.
times when you presented yourself as grumpy, right? And I thought that that was an important part of this, because that is a normal, natural part of hiking the trail, that you get grumpy or cranky and maybe you're sore, and you hike through 20 miles of shin splints and with no clear sense that things were going to get better, right? And so I'm curious about the decisions you made for self-presentation throughout this. Was that a conscious effort for you to say, I want to make sure that I'm giving a fair picture of sort of who I am? Is there, I mean, it seemed almost at some points maybe you're being too hard on yourself at different points.
Oh, thank you. Um, I don't know if there initially, I just kind of wrote what I experienced and what I felt, and I wanted to be as accurate as possible, which I guess equals honesty. And then I think in earlier drafts, like my husband read an earlier draft, and I think that maybe he felt I was a little hard on him. And while I wanted to quote the Anne Lamont, which is saying of, if you want people to write warmly about you, you should have behaved should behave better. But I really wanted to make sure that I was equally hard on myself, or just made it clear that it wasn't just I wasn't trying to rant about, oh, my terrible husband did all these awful things. I just wanted to like present the perspective of how I experienced this. And it wasn't always like, it was not a one-sided, like everyone was, not
Yeah.
everyone was contributing to the challenges, or I was equally contributing to the challenges. And I wanted to I mean, it you know it I wanted to present exactly what happened from my point of view, and also not try to create this biased or inaccurate presentation that made me look like an angel, like, which I
Right.
was not.
Yeah, I mean, I
None of
thought
us
I
are.
thought the book did a great job of capturing sort of what I would say sort of a fair picture, or at least what seemed to be a fair picture of the places where, I mean, I think there are some spots, especially with Curry, where you share, there's always one of the boys by him, which shows that he does have this sort of this important, right, that you don't become important to other people by being a bad person. So I think that there's this sort of fairness in that, and there are those really special moments when you two share different times of connection that kind of flash back to when you were hiking it earlier, and maybe you don't have weed this time, but maybe you're but you are
It was
having
just
these.
once.
It was just yeah. But there were some really great moments where, there was this sort of understanding and sort of openness about places where there were frustrations, but also this place where this is something that takes work, right? And you have a section and a reflection on work and taking things, thinking about the work that it takes, and sometimes when things work really well, or at least are functional, that maybe we forget to put in that work. And so I thought
Yeah.
that that was important. So I mean, I think as a reader, I don't think the sense that the reader gets is that you were bashing him by any stretch. I think
Okay.
it was one of those that the dynamic was one where this is real. It's what hiking's like, that you have different people with competing interests in what they get out of the trail, and maybe the communication hasn't been clear, and so there's not a clear understanding of why those heads are butting. But it's also an acknowledgement that that's a two-way street, and that channel doesn't necessarily get opened all the time. And so I would encourage, I mean, in all seriousness, I would encourage anybody thinking of hiking the trail with somebody or with many somebodies to take a look at this, because I personally, I have this is not you. I'm not saying this is we're this in common, but I have a strong personality. So it can be very hard for me to pair up with somebody before hiking the trail successfully, because when we get on trail, I can be a bit like Curry, right? Like I'm ready to make miles and I want to wake up at 5 in the morning and be hiking by 5:15. I'm not as averse to a wet 10 as he is, but I'm certainly ready to go. But then and so I tend to go solo because then I naturally find the people who hike like me because they're all walking together at the same pace. But I do think that this is a great rumination on why we hike the trail, what it's like. I think it's also a good one for if you get the Kindle version to read as you go, because I think you did a really solid job of explaining the areas, but not giving too much away. And so I think people can still have a very fresh experience reading it as they go. And so I think that, I mean, I can't say enough good about it. I'm sorry if I'm fanboying out here, but I think everybody, again, uphill both ways, hiking toward happiness on the Colorado Trail. I do want to ask here, when I read it, there was this sort of, there was this, the epilogue kind of explained where things were. And so I think it's a sort of a final question for you. If you're thinking about that sort of hiking toward happiness, do you feel as if, how much closer do you think you are to that goal? And if you do feel like you've made some ground, I know you talk a little bit about sort of slowing down, right? Not feeling rushed is key for you in terms of happiness. But are there other keys that you would share? Anything else that you have about that sort of sense of happiness? Do you feel like you reached it? Do you feel like maybe it's something that you'll have to sort of stop in the gas station and refill and replenish? Is there, it's sort of an open-ended question, but I've got a couple leading parts there, I guess.
Yeah, I definitely think that I mean, I know for sure I'm definitely a much happier person than I was before we set out on the hike. Being able to quit a terrible job and work full time as a writer certainly helped. I did have to go back to work temporarily, in the interim because somebody needed braces. And that, was a little bit of a setback. But I don't think I'm happy in a cubicle, so that's part of it. But I think having gone and hiked the trail, how that specifically applies to happiness is it gave me more perspective on my life and, like what's important, what I value and how I want to spend my time. It definitely gave me like kind of refilled my need for sky views, like we live right in the trees, so you don't get that very much.
Right.
I it's been 6 years, so I could use probably a little shot in the arm, but for now it's I feel pretty good, and I can remind myself, and writing the book gave me the opportunity to relive those moments, and both the challenging moments and the good moments, preferably the good moments. And now sharing the book with other people has been really fun and exciting way to re-experience the trail again a third time. So it's like splitting wood, warms you 3 times.
It's got me really excited. As I mentioned before, I've covered every step of the trail at least twice, most of them 3 times. And I'm setting off in July again, and it's got me excited about going again. And I had some reservations about motivation and whether or not, because it's so hard that you have to be ready. And I was really thinking, am I going to be able to make it to Durango? In some respects, I've had more doubts about my ability to make it this year than years past. And I know, I mean, at this point, I know, I think I could do it without the data book because I'm so familiar with certain parts of it, but it's really a good one for sort of refreshing people as to why they do it. Last yes or no question. Did you do the drawings in the book?
Yes.
I hope so.
I did.
I'm going to share 1 or 2.
Yeah.
These are gems, by the way. These are just terrific. I need to find a really good one. So for those of you who are listening, I'm looking for one. There are sketches. And so each chapter has different sketches of different plants and wildlife. I hope you can see that okay. Just fantastic. It's just a leaf, but when you look at it, the detail was really phenomenal. So I was hoping the answer was yes there. Andrea,
yeah, I don't know why it's not more clear on the book, but those are me, and those are my photographs too.
We'll send the editor's name to me, and I'll make them make it clearer. We'll have it in 4K by the end of the week. They're terrific. They turned out great.
Thank you.
They're super clear actually in the book. I think they turned out really nicely, and I think that they you know the I've always been frustrated with my ability to draw and capture things. So very jealous of your skill there. So thank you again,
Thank you.
Andrea Lani. I messed up the last. I have a friend at work who is Andrea, and so I'm getting them. I'm gonna hit this one.
That's okay. That's how my grandma said it. So I'll just
Gotcha.
pretend you're a little old Austrian lady.
Andrea Lani, thank you so much. This has been terrific. I'm really grateful for your time, especially grateful here for your book. I want to mention here, so Mad Hippies asked for a reminder of where they can get this book. There is a link in the description below. This one is, it is an Amazon affiliate link, so if you choose to purchase it there, then you can certainly, it will help the channel, won't cost you any more. But I will say, if you find a good deal on any of the books, it's certainly worth a read. If you're heading out on the trail, pick up a Kindle version of it if you're going to take a Kindle. I've read a lot of travel books. This one is it is nicely written, very thoughtfully done. I remember you describing one of the deers as a deer is having liquid eyes, right? And this sort of it's thoughtful, it's not overdone, it's just so perfect for the trail and captures that spirit. So thank you so much. Hang on with us here for a moment. So I'm going to have you in the green room there. I'm going to say goodbye, and then I'll say goodbye to you if you have a moment. Is that okay?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. Andrea Lani, grateful for your time. Got it that time.
You got it. Thanks.
Thanks. Well, everybody, I am so excited to have been able to speak with Andrea Lani there. The book is terrific. I spent the last week working my way through it, and I think it's just it really captures the highs and lows of the trip. It also will tell you more about the trail than you ever knew. For example, the dirt road in segment 4 is called Hooper Road or Hooper Mine Road. There's a name for it. And that road is going to kick all of our butts in just a couple of weeks. If you are heading out there, it is a super challenging segment. Just a couple of reminders here. So if you are in Denver on June 30th at Races Brewing, we're going to have a launch party for all the folks who are taking off on July 1st. I'll be there. I'm really excited to take off July 1st early in the morning and start making my way down to Durango. So we'll be meeting up. I believe it's at 6 o'clock at Races Brewing in Denver time. I'll make sure that that's clear on the Facebook group. You can find it. It's really easy to find on the Colorado Trail Facebook group. And so please do stop by and say hello to everybody. We've got a big crew that's sort of starting on the 1st. It's pretty typical. That's a common launch date for folks. So come say hello to us and say, wish us well and share some leukotape. I'll tear you off a little bit of that as well. Be sure that you click that like and subscribe. That's pretty standard. I'll be doing some live streams from the Colorado Trail, so you'll want to subscribe so that you can kind of know when they're coming up. They won't be on Sunday nights like we normally do. They'll just have to be days that I show up in towns, but I'd be happy to be able to keep in touch with all of you out there. And then last thing, just as a reminder, tomorrow night, make sure that you check out Girl Plus Dog Adventures. She is absolutely crushing it. Be sure you check out her videos as well. They're dynamite. They were enough to make me want to marry her. And so be sure you check out Girl Plus Dog Adventures and click like and subscribe on that channel, because tomorrow she is giving away a ton of stuff. Girl Plus Dog Adventures swag, all kinds of stuff. She'll be answering your questions and giving away a Nemo tent, brand new Nemo bike pack tent. I'm going to be in the chat trying to win it. So hopefully you can out-comment me and make a go at winning that one. It's going to be a really good time. It's her first live stream, and so I think it'll be just phenomenal. So be sure you show up for that. I'll look forward to seeing you all there. Let me see if I could take this down here, and then I will say goodbye to everybody. So everyone, grateful for you, grateful for your time. Hit me up on Instagram at Backcountry Champion. I will send you a sticker in the mail just to say thanks for staying tuned here. And everybody, have a great day. Enjoy this week. Can't wait to see you all soon. Take care. This is Snackbox out.